And there's another brand of motorcycle by Verge that famously has the donut wheel with no hub.
Yeah.
Do you have any plans to distribute those?
Oh, we'd love to. As distributors, it's quite a complicated process, more complicated than it should be, to get bikes into Australia and get the road approved. So for the brands that we've done it with, we have to take all the road approvals from North America and Europe, and we have to adapt the paperwork and submit it to the Department of Infrastructure. We have to bring a test bike in for further testing. So it's quite an expensive and long process. That means that really we can only do it for a few brands because the resources required, the capital required, you have to buy a test bike, bring it in, go through all like specific imports to get that bike in here and tested. So we think that we're really only going to have the capacity to be distributors for about 3 brands.
Right.
So then that means we have to really be careful which brands we pick, because we have to be able to sell enough of the bikes to cover our costs of getting the bikes approved here. We need to hit the right market segments. So, we've got the ultra premium segment with the Italian bikes. We need some manufacturers that sit in that 8 to 20 bracket, which is really hard to find right now. And then we'd like to find another manufacturer that sits kind of between the 20 and the 45 brackets. Aussie dollars, what we've seen in our UK business, English Electric, is that somebody will come in and start riding one of the smaller electric bikes. They'll ride that for 2 or 3 years, they'll come back, they'll sell that bike, and they'll upgrade to a bigger one. And they have this kind of lifetime journey with us in the UK, and we want to replicate that here. Problem is, at the moment, we don't really have bikes in the middle. We've got scooters and we've got high-end bikes, and we really want the bikes in the middle. So Verge, from what I've seen, is probably not going to fit that bracket. It's going to be more, again, premium end.
What about the Sondor's motorcycle?
Sondor's looks really interesting, and the reviews are decent. The problem with that on the other end of the spectrum is with the cheap bikes, we have to sell so many of them to make our money back on the distribution costs. So with the Italian bikes, for example, that first initial approval, we knew we had to sell 20 bikes to cover the cost of that approval process. Whereas something like a Sondor's, Sondor's motorcycle, we'd probably have to sell at least over 100, maybe even 200 to make the cost work, because they were selling that bike for 5,000 US now. I think it's gone up to 6,500 US. So, if they're selling direct to consumer, so there's no dealer margin, there's no distributor margin built in.
Given the difficulties that you mentioned, do you see any government help or incentives to drop that barrier, given that there's a lot of noise at the moment of them trying to sort of facilitate EVs in Australia? Do you see any help coming forward with EV motorcycles?
It's definitely improving. Like we talked about it earlier, fringe benefits tax on cars, they've removed customs duties, and they're making it cheaper in every way they can. Unfortunately, that hasn't trickled down to motorcycles yet. In Queensland, there's an EV incentive as well, where you get a rebate on any EV up to the value of, I think it's $60,000. New South Wales has a similar program. Electric motorcycles aren't included.
So I was talking about incentives for you as a distributor, but you're saying there aren't even effective
there's actually
incentives for customers either.
There's actually disincentives. So if you import, as a distributor, if you import a Ducati that's built literally 10 kilometers away from where the Italian bikes that we sell are built, if you distribute that into Australia, import that into Australia, there's no customs duty, there's no 5% customs duty. Whereas we bring in an electric motorcycle from just down the road and we get 5% we have to pay to the government to bring that bike in. Plus we have to pay GST and shipping. The shipping companies are being really painful about about batteries, about taking batteries on ships.
Right.
So that's it adds expense and it adds complication. So at the moment, bringing in electric motorcycles and distributing them in Australia is way harder than petrol motorcycles. So we really want to change that. E-bikes recently have been now included on novated leases. So you've got electric cars and e-bikes on novated leases, but electric motorcycles are not included, which again seems crazy. So there's a long way to go. We're in contact with a few senators and ministers about trying to improve things. And we've had some responses. We wrote to Senator David Pocock. He was pretty influential in some of those incentives that have gone live. And he wanted plug-in hybrids not to be included in incentives, which we agree makes sense. So we wrote to him, his office, and said, why aren't electric motorcycles included? And they've responded saying, thanks for flagging this, and they wanted some more information. We've submitted to the ACT EV adoption inquiry, explaining all the things that are slowing the supply of electric motorcycles and scooters to Australia. So we're trying to run a business. We're also trying to like improve the situation in Australia, and it's just a lot. That's why we'd love to bring in Verge. We'd love to bring in Sondors, every cool electric motorcycle. But at the moment, it's just Alex and I running the business, and there's only so many things the two of us can do. So
yeah, it's a shame that it falls to people like you to sort of
yeah,
prompt them. But
things have definitely improved. There's a way to go. I think the problem is there's probably not enough people that ride motorcycles in government key positions that make decisions.
Maybe
so
not.
yeah, so they just seem to get forgotten. But if we can get electric motorcycles included on novated leases, if we can get fringe benefits tax removed like the cars, if we can get customs duty removed, if we can, in the UK they have a plug-in vehicle grant as well, which applies to anything, cars, motorbikes, scooters, and it's a percentage of the value. So if we get something like that, federal level, then all of that will help drive down the price of these bikes. And they are expensive. There's no denying that. You know, they're on average 40 to 60% more expensive than the petrol equivalent. Unfortunately, that's the reality of the price of the batteries, and it's not just a battery cell. It's the battery management system. It's all of the technology, all of the R&D that goes into that, which you don't need on a petrol motorcycle because they've had 100 years of that. You know, so. That's a question we get often is, you know, why are the battery packs so expensive? You know, they are between a third and 50% of the price of the bike here. The wholesale price of the bike here is just the battery pack, which, you know, is the controller, it's the inverter, it's the battery cells, it's the management system, but it is just a lot more expensive than a petrol engine. So we need as much help as we can to drive those prices down, to increase adoption, because people want them. And you'll see today when you ride it, it's quite hard to go back to a petrol motorcycle.
well, I've sold mine, I'm not going back.
Yeah.